Hello everybody. So this is now the second video looking at the beginning of Blood Brothers. In the previous video we looked at that opening tableau. This video then will focus on the prologue delivered by the narrator, which is after the single line of Mrs. Johnston is the first thing that the audience hears. Before we look at the actual words, though, it's worth just talking a little bit about the narrator's costume. And this is something that, although it's not specifically named in the scripts, is constant to all of the productions of the play that I have seen over the last few years, of which I have seen numerous. But black suit, black tie. In other words, we're looking at the attire of a funeral. And that's significant, because the narrator is going to be a character who's very much this fateful presence in the play. He is going to be somebody who often is particularly associated with dramatic moments, shocking moments, and doom-laden moments as well. So yes, a real looming presence, and so that's just worth emphasising. Now, before we start with anything else, then let's read it. So, did ye hear the story of the Johnston twins, as like each other as two new pins, of one womb born on the self-same day, how one was kept and one given away? And did you never hear how the Johnstons died, never knowing that they shared one name, till the day they died, when a mother cried, my own dear sons lie slain? And did you never hear of a mother so cruel as a stone in place of her heart? Then bring her on, and come judge for yourselves how she came to play this part. Now, there are a number of things then that I would like to talk about here. First of all, the way that this actually begins with a connective, so did you hear, immediately gives us a kind of conversational tone, an informal tone. Again, this is not we, the audience, being lectured or being addressed from a pulpit, being preached at. This is Willie Russell, who wants to think of himself as an ordinary man, addressing us as ordinary people. Did you hear the story? We are straight away drawn into this narrative. The Johnston twins. See how already he is revealing key plot details, and that's very much a feature of these prologues, which I'll talk about a little more later. He goes on then with that simile, as like each other as two new pins. Now that's significant because it emphasises that Mickey and Edward are identical twins. In fact, I would argue that simile is actually crucial. What we see in the course of this play is the fact that they grow apart, and although occasionally they are mistaken for one another, notably by Mrs. Johnston when she sees the picture of Mickey in Edward's locket in Act 2, broadly speaking, nobody ever makes the connection that they are in fact twins. And what therefore Willie Russell is saying is that, in a sense, this is almost like a kind of a sociological experiment put into a play, because he's saying that they might have the same genes and start off identical, but the difference is in diet, for example, poorer quality food, better quality food, the difference in medical care, for example, health care, and of course grooming, cleanliness, clothing, mean that very quickly, even by age 7, when the boys first meet again, already they have grown apart so much that they are unrecognisable as twins. In other words, Willie Russell is saying that's the impact, the pernicious impact that society can have. He goes on then, of one womb born on the self-same day, how one was kept and one given away. Again, see how he is really trailing here important plot details. I think partly that is meant to intrigue us, partly it's a show of confidence and strength from the point of view of a writer, But I also think this is Willie Russell saying, these are not my main points. What's not important here is the fact that they were kept and given away. What's important is what happens next. Willie Russell is more interested in making the social points about this, and so I think he's giving us this information now because he doesn't want our being shocked at it to distract us later on. So, in this first sort of 4-line stanza, which you'll note ends there with the question, he deals with their birth. In the second 4-line stanza, or quatrain as we can call it, he carries on. Notice it begins with another connective, and it's informal, but again then, it's informal, as you all know, I'm sure, from your schooling experiences. You're taught that starting a sentence with "and" is a bad thing. So again, it's all about Willie Russell and creating the character of a narrator as somebody who is, in a sense, relatable, although I don't like that word, perhaps relevant to our everyday lives. But he goes on then, and did you never hear how the Johnstons died? So he's jumped from the previous stanza of their birth and the second stanza to their deaths. He's just told us the whole plot of the play in 5 lines. But never knowing that they shared one name till the day they died. Another important detail, when a mother cried, my own dear sons lie slain. Now, there is an interesting sort of juxtaposition here, because on the one hand you have this very very informal, slightly colloquial language, Colloquial, here, and yet on that line, my own dear sons lie slain. Phrases like lie slain, and particularly that sort of adverb slain here. It's much more self-consciously literary. It's much more kind of formal in language. And I think that Willie Russell is trying to make a claim for this play, the way that he switches between registers, between levels of formality. This is a story about ordinary people, and yet it is every bit as painful and dramatic and important as a story about people of the highest quality. I'll talk a little bit later about tragic elements in this play, but I think the classical ancient Greek tragedy is of noble characters, of gods, of monsters, and I think that it just, in glimpses of vocabulary like that, this is Willie Russell sort of showing that, yes, he is in contact with that nobler side of tragedy, because what we see here is a very seemingly working class version, but we'll talk more about that later. It goes on then here, and did you never hear of the mother so cruel, there's a stone in place of her heart? Now I think this is important, because in the space of these 4 lines, split across the 3rd and 4th stanza here, you have, I beg your pardon, the 2nd and 3rd stanza, you have two, well, what we'll find out will be the portrayal of 2 mothers, one who is crying and grief-stricken, and one who is cruel. Now that's confusing and ambiguous, because it's not immediately clear that we're talking about more than one. Of course, as we go on, we'll find out that one of those will be Mrs. Johnston and one of those will be Mrs. Lyons. Now again, this is an interesting question, I think, about the prejudices that we bring to a reading of this play. Because when we meet Mrs. Johnston and Mrs. Lyons, and you have the working class mother and the middle class mother, you have the middle class mother with a beautiful home, who is well spoken, seemingly well educated, seemingly has everything. And then you have this working class woman who is a single parent. We find out her children have been involved in crime. We find out that she's living in poverty. Now, social stereotypes, however cruel they may be, might lead us to think that perhaps it will be the working class parent who will turn out to be the one who is more problematic. And yet actually what Willie Russell does with this play is he subverts that stereotype, he subverts that expectation that we might have by demonstrating to us that Mrs. Johnston will be the loving and the caring mother who makes the best of the bad situation. And actually it will be the middle class, not the working class, but the middle class parent, Mrs. Lyons, who will turn out to be deeply problematic and flawed. In Willie Russell's view, whether you accept it or not, he is suggesting that it is the middle classes who are the exploiters, the cruel people. They are the real problems in society. I do think that Willie Russell's viewpoint there is problematic, and I will address that in a later video, but not for here. And the final couplet, then bring her on and come judge for yourselves how she came to play this part. Now there's two more significant things there. First of all, judge for yourselves. Willie Russell, for reasons which I will explain in a later video, does not want us to get lost in the world of this play. He does not want us to become so involved that we forget ourselves. He wants us to, on some level, remain above it so that we can objectively judge, that we can evaluate what's happening and take from it the moral messages that he wants from us. Finally, in that line, how she came to play this part, it's emphasising for us what we call the theatricality, emphasising that this is in fact not real. So in a sense, it alludes back to the tell me it's not true, say it's just a story thing of the previous of the previous line, the first line of the play. It's a reminder that we're looking at work of fiction, for reasons I'll explain later. So, let's think then now about form in the prologue. Form, by that I'm referring to, in a sense, the sort of the shape, as it were, of the text. What's worth noting? Well, first of all, the fact that it's written in rhyming couplets. It's written in verse, i.e. poetry, which is something that is reserved really for moments of intensity and particular significance, and I think that's especially the case here. It's a very dramatic moment, while we're looking at the dead bodies. Now, the fact that this is 12 lines in length means that we can argue, and as often when you express these views, you can do so in a tentative way, as in you can say, well, this can be seen as, this might suggest, because often with these interpretations we can't know, but we can plausibly suggest. It can be seen as an incomplete sonnet. You may ask, what is a sonnet? In the box to the right there is a handy reminder. So, it is a short poem of Renaissance Italian origin, sort of 15th century. A 14-line poem, typically about love, addressed from one, usually male, lover to another, usually female, with a regular rhyme scheme and a meter being the poetic word for a rhythm. So, it seems rather like that, but in that case then, it's missing the final two lines, the final couplet. Now, if we view this as an incomplete sonnet, then what we can say is that the part which would be missing would be that final rhyming couplet, which typically provides what is called the resolution, that neat sense of ending and conclusion at the end of the poem. This prologue lacks that, only 12 lines long. That, I think, is Willie Russell's way of saying that this play itself will lack a neat and easy and obvious conclusion. There will be no easy answers that Willie Russell is going to offer us. He is only going to hold up a mirror to our world and show us what is wrong with it. So in that sense, I think the form here foreshadows the play as a whole. So it can be argued then again that Russell subverts this sonnet form, which is usually associated with love, often ideal love. He subverts it to indicate that this play will be neither a straightforward romance, nor will it lead us to any easy answers or conclusions. Now, some useful references then about language, which covers the prologue here, but the play as a whole. I think this is an important thing to note. Now, the Liverpudlian accent, note there Liverpudlian is the adjective for someone from Liverpool. Never use the word scouse because it's terribly informal. So the Liverpudlian accent, as is how the working class characters speak, is very important to the play. We saw it just now with the narrator. The juxtaposition, i.e. the contrast between this and the received pronunciation, also known as RP, which means a posh accent, of the middle class characters is very important as it emphasises the social gulf between them. So it's a very important thing as used by Russell time and again in the play. But please never refer to them as scouse and posh. It's always Liverpudlian and receive pronunciation. Now he uses what we call phonetic spelling, spelling how something sounds and contractions, using apostrophes to indicate missing letters like y for you, and for and as well later we'll see dialect words like soft, get, and dead to demonstrate this as well. Soft being used to refer to somebody who is stupid, get as an insult to somebody, as in you cheeky get, and dead is used as a kind of as an adjective like to go to bed dead late, for example. So these are just some of the things that he uses, but again, it's an important marker in the play. It's worth noting because already from the prologue we see it evidenced from the narrator. Now, there are a few questions then here which I would suggest that you now do, working back over that section and what we've just said. I think now looking at this, we've covered most of the answers to these. I would pause it if you want to answer them. Assuming now that you've unpaused it, there's just a couple of points that I will elaborate on slightly. So for 3A, it's particularly the fact that it focuses on what seems like almost the dual nature of this mother, which we find later because we're talking about two, Johnston and Lyons. Similar or different to the way she presented visually? Well, because only one half of the description, the mother crying about her own dear sons lying slain, that half seems to conform to what we see, the grieving mother. And so obviously that conflicting thing between the two mothers is going to be a key tension that will drive the drama in the rest of this play. We've talked about the fact that the prologue trails the plot of the play. You can think about the effects of it. Now, in terms of number 5, comparing this to anything that you have read before. Now, some of you may have come across plays like Romeo and Juliet, which make use of a prologue in a very similar way. Now, in the case of Romeo and Juliet, it does use a 14-line, it does use a full sonnet. This is Willie Russell, in a sense, who is deliberately aligning himself with aspects of that literary tradition. This is not just a kind of free-form play. This is him aligning himself with some of these other aspects. He's making a claim, in a sense, for this play by saying that it's a serious work of literature and deserves to be treated with just as much seriousness as a text like that. And then number 6, it refers to the subverted sonnet, which we've already covered. So we'll leave that there for now, and then in the next video we'll go on to look at some more aspects, and we'll think about particularly Mrs. Johnston and her first song on Marilyn Monroe. Thank you once again.